Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, author of the contemporary romance series The Bourbon Books and works of speculative fiction. I am so thrilled to be joined today by author and poet Mary McMyne, here to talk about her forthcoming, almost out release, The Book of Gothel. Mary, welcome to the show. Did I botch your name?
No, you got it right.
Okay, good. We were talking before we went live because her book is full of these difficult names for me because I don't have German background, at least linguistically. Genetically, yes. And then I found out I was also butchering Mary's name. So when I was announcing her on the last show, I'm like, it's McMyne. So Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself and about this lovely book, which I ate it up.
Well, I'm Mary McMyne, as you've already said. I've been writing about fairy tales for about 10 years. I've read them when I was a child. My mother told folk tales at bedtime. It's something that means a lot to me, and I'm a huge fan of them. And when I first started telling the stories to my daughter, who is now 11, I started thinking about why the tales were the way they were, and why the female characters were flatter than the male characters. And I started getting all these ideas about poems that would kind of change the fairy tales, and the idea for Heloise, the heroine of this book, who is a storyteller and a witch in medieval Germany who, told these tales and ends up becoming the witch from Rapunzel.
And I love that you talk about the fact that you were drawn to this because the women characters are flatter than the males, that they don't have the development. And I love the fact that this book is the most feminist retelling of any of the fairy tales I've read. And that's not to say it's like, oh, it's super political, but it just embraces female nature and the fact that during so much of this time, women had no power, no say in their lives. If the men in their lives discarded them or treated them badly, they didn't have a whole lot of options going forward. And you address that and what that means for these characters like Heloise. And I'm going to get her name wrong every single time. For those who are like, I'm going to look up this name in the book, you're not going to spell it right because it's like Healwivse. Yeah. I think I just butchered that. But yeah, it looks like Hailweiss, but it's Heloise. And you said it's the origin of the name Heloise. So this is like the original hints of Heloise or something like that. But then this led you to write these poems. So do you want to tell us a little about these poems? Because you are an award-winning poet for your chapbook for that. Are you not? Am I getting that correct?
No, I won an award.
I love it.
My chapbook is called Wolfskin, and it's like a short poetry collection. I think it has 20 poems in it, and it's framed by following this woman whose mother told her dark fairy tales as a child, and the mother is kind of has a sort of damaged perspective on life, and so the fairy tales are pretty dark, but she sort of like transforms herself, her ideas about herself as she goes through remembering these stories and sort of changing them. So it has retellings of fairy tales from the perspective of women characters whose motivations aren't fully explored, and then also just characters who aren't really explored at all as point of view characters. Like there's one from the point of view of the woodsman who saves Red Riding Hood, and there's another from the point of view of the mother from Hansel and Gretel, or the stepmother, depending upon which version that you read. But yeah, so it follows this woman thinking through all these stories that her mother told her as a child and changing them.
And I love that because you and I talked a little before we went live. I was having such a hard time on social media figuring out how to describe this because I think right now fairy tale retellings, they're all the rage. Everybody's like, yes, I've got a retelling of this, that, and every other story, and every other story is secretly Beauty and the Beast right now. I think that's what I've heard is they're all Beauty and the Beast. This one's not, thankfully, but I feel like calling it a fairy tale retelling is selling it so short because there's so much more to this than just the Rapunzel story, which is part of the story, and obviously the cover alludes to it, but it is not the primary motivation of the story. It's not the primary motivation of the main character in this, who is the woman who puts Rapunzel in the tower. And you call her a witch, but I never thought of her as a witch. And okay, Abby says, I need to read this. Yes, you do. Abigail lives in the UK, or I would just be like, here, you can borrow my copy and then I'll get it back. That's kind of hard to do. But it's historically grounded, first of all, because it's set in Germany, and you list real kings and real people in power, and you set this very real time when the church was a certain way, and you had to address the king. He was also having a fight with the Pope, and how this plays into the people and what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, and the interaction between religion. I've never read a fairy tale retelling that goes so deep with so many levels, even from the start, which gives these characters a really grounded feel that I don't want people to be like, oh, it's historical. I don't want to read a history book, because it doesn't feel like a history book, but it has that realism, if that makes any sense. Was that something that you had to do a lot of research for? Mary told me I was not allowed to call her a scholar during this. But you had to do research, yeah?
I did have to do research, but that doesn't make me a scholar.
It does. In my book, that makes you a scholar. Because for those of us who are like fantasy writers or science fiction writers, the biggest research I had to do was like, what's a kind of fish that I'll find off the coast of California? That's not really a whole lot of research. Whereas you have this whole complex political system, and what was the kind of lifestyle these people had back then, because unless you have a time machine, which makes you a very different kind of writer, you didn't experience all these things. But the reality of it, and how her mother, and I'll just start with the fact that at the very beginning we have this, and I listed on my Goodreads page as it's a found manuscript, because it starts with a little part. So if you start reading it and go, well, this is set modern day, because someone has been given this manuscript, and the woman writes her name not as by a man's last name, but lists herself as the daughter. So like right from the get-go, you're feminist saying, I'm claiming myself as the daughter of this woman and her knowledge. Where did you come up with the idea to be claiming that? And did you decide, like, I want to do this particular story? Because it sounds like you did a lot of different stories with the poetry book. Was there something about this one that said, this is the one I want to explore deepest first?
I think, I don't know. I mean, I was interested in, like, what you were talking about with history. I'm interested in the way, especially with medieval history and ancient history, I'm interested in what's left out. And I think that's what drew me to this era. Like, we don't really know what the folk tales are that people told one another at this particular time. We don't really know. We know some details about what the lives of women were like, but when you go and you look at, especially like traditional history books, and until like the last, few decades, most of it focuses on like the kings and the emperors and the Pope and military battles and things like that. And it's only recently that these other perspectives are getting explored. So I was interested in, I think that's what drew me to the time period. That's what drew me to trying to retell these tales. And when I originally started the book, it was actually flowing from a lot of the different stories. And I think that as I wrote the book, I'm not like a person who, well, I am now because I have a second book contract, but I'm not a person who is an outline writer or, a huge plotter. I really started this book. It was kind of my escape while I was raising my child late at night. It was what I did to like feed my creative soul. And and so I let it flow. And she told me about her life, and she referenced all of these stories, and then I would have to go and research them, and I had to go and research the time period. But I think the Rapunzel tale ended up getting foregrounded a little bit more than the others. I think there's also Red Riding Hood. There's also Snow White. There's hints of even like a little bit of Cinderella. There's like blips here and there throughout the story.
And I noticed that, and I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to bring up all the Easter eggs in here, because you have so many other tales referenced, from the big bad wolf to all sorts of things. So I'm going, this is all of the tales. This isn't just this one. And some of them are ones that Heloise has already known, and she's like, okay, I know these tales because my mother told me these tales. But others, it's like she's living through them, and you wonder, okay, is she going to tell the next generation the stories about what she went through and how those change over time?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I tried to do. I tried to make, like, for example, we know that there was a Red Riding Hood variant that was being told before this time, and that's why Heloise knows about it, right? But then other ones she kind of like invents, and of course, like folk tales and fairy folk tales are constantly being transformed. They're dynamic, right? And there's much earlier variants. So when we talk about the ones we know, there's no original version, and so
Right.
So I tried to walk into that soup, but it's a very complex soup.
It is.
And I'm not a scholar. I'm like a huge fan of folk tales and fairy tales.
You can be a folk tale fan without being a full-on scholar, because I don't know, maybe you need to be like, I've got a PhD in folklore, which I'm sure there are a lot of people who do and are going, yes, and I am a scholar. Stop calling people scholars who aren't, Allison. But I appreciate all the details that you put into this, and I was laughing at everything from the fact that here you've got this girl who's like, I can't sew. I'm like, well, me neither. Doesn't mean you're not. and the things that she wasn't shown, and things that she had to learn along the way, and how we learn skills, all of these things are explored in a need to know kind of way of like, hey, who's going to feed this person? Because I think that's one of the biggest things about this book, is that so many of the decisions are driven by need. And so when you're looking at somebody who ends up being cast as a villain, I never saw her as a villain the entire time. She's a person who's put in these situations, and I don't want to do spoilers here, but people let her down. People disappoint her. Her own body lets her down most of the time, because she's born with the inability, and this isn't a spoiler because it's near the beginning, she can't really see a lot of light because her eyes are like permanently dilated. So going outside the light is too much from her. And she has these spells that end up kind of knocking her out. And what does that mean? And there's both physical aspects and metaphysical aspects. And you just weave all of it together so beautifully that it's like sometimes you forget. And I love this when I read, I forget where the line is between medicine and folklore and mysticism, and then it kind of even weaves into religion. And I loved how you handled that too, going back to the whole idea of what was allowed to be written down and what wasn't, and whose stories got passed on, and anything that is outside of that is instantly demonized. And I feel like we still do that. Like anything that is outside the mainstream is automatically evil and bad and wrong, and we don't even really stop to listen to see, well, what could have been learned from that, and without throwing out an entire oral tradition or entire healing tradition or things like that. Did you do a lot of, like, was there a lot of research done into some of these old plants? Because I love some of these things. I'm going, I've never heard of any of this stuff other than obviously Rapunzel. Everybody's heard of Rapunzel. But do you have a garden now with all of these growing, and can I have some?
I do not have a garden right now because I moved around a lot. But I did at one point, and I even grew hellebore, which is something that's in the novel, but I don't anymore because I just moved to a new place, like literally
New
2
garden.
weeks ago. Yeah, new garden.
New garden.
But yeah, I'm fascinated with herbalism and with medieval concepts of magic and medieval concepts of I can't even really say medicine, but medieval concepts of healing, and so one of the things that I did while researching the book was I read everything that Hildegard of Bingen has written that has been translated into English.
What was it originally in?
Latin.
I was going to say, so that like language plays a big part in this book too, where there are places that Heloise goes where she doesn't speak the language, and people are speaking in other languages, and people are like cursing in other languages, and she wants to learn more of it. So even the fact that like certain languages were suppressed and you can't say certain languages, how much information we've lost over the years because the language that they were told in just got shut down.
Yeah. again, I'm not a linguist or anything, but these are things that fascinate me, and I tried to incorporate them into the book. You know, it kind of all goes back to the idea of perspective. Who's telling the story? What words are they using to tell the story? And how do you tell a story? How do you tell a story from a perspective that the words don't fully exist for anymore? I'm struggling to not give spoilers.
Like, don't say this part, but it is true with the languages that change over the years. And getting back to something you said about the fact that the history was told at a time when, okay, so let's start with the fact that most of people back then were illiterate. So nobody's going to be able to read anything anyway. And then if you are only literate in one language and more than one language is going around, or one language is being suppressed, how much knowledge is being lost? And the few people who are allowed to be literate or writing are also controlled by the church. And that made a big difference too. So if anything was deemed heretical, well, then we weren't going to be allowed to write it down. And then the idea of like, okay, well, this is a manuscript that was found. So you do have a woman who was literate, who was able to write this down, and then has to be translated in the future. So obviously, because this book is not written in German, despite it, don't worry, it's not in German. Sorry, German readers, it's all English, but that there are German words and then even other languages. And I don't even know what some of them are, whether they were Latin or other languages, because sometimes they talk about, oh, it's the language the priests speak, which I'm assuming was Latin, but it could have been something else back then too. I don't know.
Yeah. There's like little snippets of little languages. One of them is the language of magic that's kind of passed down among the women, and it's part of the old ways that they pass down in that tradition. And that one is like fully made up. It's inspired by older languages, but it's not real.
Good, because I didn't put it in Google Translate to figure out what we were saying. Originally, I didn't need to, because you always did contextually. You knew what was being said. Like, oh, somebody just got cursed. That is not good for them. You can tell by the tone and the context. And I love that you had those things in there. But it's true, because a lot of these things, we would have lost the languages along the way, and we wouldn't have been able to look into, oh, well, what is this? And I'm reminded years ago, I live in Southern California, for people who don't know. There is a very lovely garden and library collection that has like the Gutenberg Bible and things like that. That's the Huntington Gardens up in the Pasadena area. And when I was very small, maybe 6, 7 years old, my mom had taken us there, and my sister and I were allowed to get souvenirs from the gift shop. I got myself a Chaucer coloring book that came with an old disc, it was a record, but it was one of those really, really thin ones that barely played anyway. My mom's like, you're not going to understand. I'm like, well, Mom, it's in English. And then we put it on, and I'm listening to the old English going, nope, no idea what is this? My mom was just kind of laughing at me, because my sister got a Shakespeare one, which at least was mostly understandable, and she would have been like 10 at that point. But just even how English has changed, let alone other languages, for 6-year-olds out there getting Chaucer records, they're not going to understand. Generally not.
Yeah.
But I love how you embrace those languages and those changes, and how Heloise does as well, and just even the changes in her life, because I've read a lot of books with, I don't want to say passive or main characters who lack agency, but she is a person who both gets agency stripped from her, but then goes and seeks it out. And so I've said before, I don't see her as a bad guy, and I don't want to say, oh, this is a villain backstory, but because we've been introduced to her as a villain, including people who've seen the movie Tangled. Let's not go there. But the idea, because there's almost nothing in common with it. None of the story overlaps, other than we are taking a tale on Rapunzel and we're exploring different aspects of it. And that's the first place I'd heard the word Gothel. But obviously Disney didn't make that up either. That's got a historical background, so Disney can't sue us. Anyway, the idea being that here she is, and she's making choices, but she's not a Mary Sue in the way of like she always makes the good choices either, because she's still a person with her own passions and her own desires, and sometimes those clash with what society or her family tell her she can have. But I can't remember the last time I read a main character who is beaten over the head with the short end of the stick, as much as this poor woman is, even in just the first half of the book. But she never gives up her agency, even when all her choices are stripped away. And I'm assuming that was an intentional thing, that she doesn't just do that because A, it wouldn't be that interesting, but also that you didn't make her a completely perfect little obedient woman the entire time. I'm assuming some of that was deliberate, but maybe that's just, I don't know, Mary, maybe that's just you.
No. I mean, that's really true. I kind of wanted to walk the line between, I don't particularly love books that have, perfect heroines, and I don't particularly love books that have completely villains, like
Yeah.
that you're following. I think most people are somewhere in between that spectrum, and
Yeah,
I'm
that morally
interested.
gray place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
But even
interested.
then, yeah, I don't even know how much, like, she's not perfect, but I feel like all of her decisions are totally understandable. Like, I feel like if I were in her spot, there's no place where I went, I wouldn't have done that, Hillary. I would have. And maybe that says more about me than it does about you writing her. But I felt like she was so relatable, even though she lived like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, there are aspects of me and her too. So I relate to her as well. I think that, when I said earlier, I referred to her as a witch, and I do that just because that's how she's known to us. Right. But like at the time, I think the word that would have been used would have been like a Middle High German version of sorceress. So she's not a witch in the sense that we think about today. And I think that there's problems with the way that witches are depicted today. Anyway, so the idea was to try to sympathize with someone who is part of like a lot of fairy tales, a lot of history, especially the versions of fairy tales that we see today. Like they demonize non-Christian people, and Hellevese is part of that. By the end of the book, I don't think that's a spoiler.
Not really. Not by calling her a witch, but she's raised in a place, and then there are characters along the way who walk that line too. So I won't say more than that because I don't want to spoil it. But a lot of characters in your book do, because their choices are constricted. Like if they want to pursue a certain path, if they want to pursue a certain career or life, they have no choice but to, even if they are secretly doing something else. And I think that's common anytime there is one religion or dominant thought that suppresses other things. That's happened where Christianity has been suppressed and people are secretly Christian. It's happened in other places where it's like, nope, y'all have to be this thing, and if you aren't, we're going to hurt you in some way or hurt the people you love. And so we learn to suppress. So in any place where religious freedom isn't tantamount, even in cultures where it's not legally suppressed, but culturally it's suppressed, it's not encouraged to say that you're not, people end up having to suppress those things and walk that line or have a public face that's different than their private face. And I think you did that not just with Hellevese, but with other characters throughout too.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm interested in as a writer, just like the conflict between religious ideologies and personal agency and personal identity.
Well, and I even loved how career choices, and kind of getting back to the idea of her being a witch. So again, not really a spoiler because it's something that's introduced at the very beginning, is that Hellevese is a daughter of a midwife and is in training to be a midwife. And when the story starts, because she's still quite young and she is not married and does not have her own children, the idea that she doesn't have children even is something that it's like, oh, well, a midwife who doesn't have her own children. Let's look askance at that. Like that makes her suspect that she doesn't have her own children, like there's something wrong with her, or that she couldn't possibly learn this trade, because back then it was a trade passed down usually from mother to daughter or from an older woman who's apprenticing a younger one. But the way that the witchcraft factors in is if the baby died, if the mother died, they were blaming the people involved. Whereas back then, before there was lots of things like modern medicine and C-sections, lots of women died in childbirth. And the fact that they had somebody there to help meant that it would help. But again, it wasn't modern medicine, and people still die in childbirth. But the way that factored in, like, okay, well, she doesn't have a baby, so we should be even more suspect of her. And it was just something she wanted to study. I found that immensely fascinating, especially as a mother myself, and the idea that, like, oh, well, if you don't have children, you're viewed as different in the terms of obstetrics, because that's what midwives were back then.
Yeah. I think that there's still a stigma today if you choose to remain child free, and I think that when I decided that I was going to explore the Rapunzel folktale, I think that you're basically beholden to get into issues of fertility and motherhood, because that's really like what's at the heart of the story, whether it's a like a biological parent, or whether it's the captor who keeps her in the tower, who is a different kind of parent, right? Like, so I knew I wanted to explore that, and the midwifery kind of came out of that. And again, I'm struggling with spoilers.
Like,
trying to
Mary, it's your own book. People want to read it. Don't. And it's funny because, so I think, like I said, I think fairy tale retellings are really, really hot right now. And certain friends who've seen me posting and are like, "Oh, what'd you think?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I loved it." And they're like, "Really?" I'm like, first off, I sought Mary out. People don't always know how I get guests. I get them in different ways, recommendations, a book I read and loved. This one I saw an email. I just saw the cover and said, "Gimme." So part of it was because that particular tale was interesting to me. But it's partly because I hadn't heard a Rapunzel retelling, and I wanted to know more about this person because of all the villains and stories. I feel like we knew the least about her, and I also liked the time period because I knew it would be a little bit older set, and I was interested in finding out more about the medieval stuff. But I do feel like with this one, because of all the things you bring to it, it's absolutely worth reading. So I don't want anybody to get into the spoilers because they're all over the place, because so much happens in this book. So I feel like that's part of it, is people are like, guys, it's like the Titanic, it sank. You can't not spoil that. No. So yes, eventually Rapunzel ends up in the tower. Shh, that's not really a spoiler. But how she gets there and why she gets there and the people involved and the story that leads her even to the tower in the first place. And I don't even mean Rapunzel. I mean Heloise. I'm getting her name wrong, aren't I? Heloise.
No, you're doing it right. Heloise.
I just call her Heloise, and then I'm too. No Heloise. Heloise. And all of her the people who act upon her life before she gets to that stage, because this isn't something where, again, not really a spoiler, Rapunzel doesn't show up in the first chapter, okay, guys? Like, she's not there right away. She's not in anybody's mind just yet. But the things that happen along the way are what make it really interesting, so that, yes, it's a retelling, but there's not going to be much of this tale that you're going to know going in. So it's not like, oh, so it's Beauty and the Beast, and then she's cursed, or no, he's cursed, and then she's got to fall in love with. No, you're not going to know most of it. And a lot of the stuff that you may have heard in other versions of the story, it's not there because Disney made it up to sell merchandise, and we all like merchandise. I personally, I keep playing with my braids because I have to do something with my hands. I can't hold them still. And I'm very sad that I don't have corpse braids, because that's a thing that I learned in Mary's book, which kind of freaked me out, where people wanted these really long hair extensions. And in the days before they had like synthetic hair and stuff, they would cut hair off a corpse and weave it into their hair. And isn't that hideous, but kind of cool too? And I told Mary I couldn't get myself any corpses. So this is just my natural hair. This is how long my hair is right now. I generally don't wear my hair in braids because I look about 12. And as a 44-year-old, I probably shouldn't look about 12, but it's fine. And maybe we can have merch for you where you sell corpse braids or something, or there are other ideas, but some of the things I'm like, even some of the pictures I took, I didn't want to tag what my inspiration was because I didn't want to give things away. Poppets, we can definitely sell poppets. Can you sew, Mary? Because I really can't.
Wait, can I sew? I'm not great. No.
I think we just, okay, first off, poppets are not the things your kids are playing with that go with the shapes, because my kids are full of those now. You've got an 11-year-old, so do I. So I don't know if that's a big thing where you are, where the kids are pushing them. It's kind of like bubble wrap, but not. Have you seen those? But poppets, like little dolls, but that Heloise's mother was making these, and some of them were inspired by current political figures, but others were inspired by older stories, and that she sells these poppets as like a way to bring in money. So there's your merch right there. It's poppets and corporate. Very probably different than what the Tangled movie did, and no animatronics, because I don't need any more toys with batteries in my house. Thank you very much. There's batteries everywhere from my children. But I did love how you brought so many different things to the party, really, that I wouldn't have expected going in, and not just the corpse braids, but things that were historically grounded and not just things you made up, including the language, which, hey, I'm awesome. I'm awesome with the fact that you made up a language even just to curse people with, because can I start doing that too? I'm going to look up some of the curses and start doing that. I'm going to have to text you and say, Mary, what did I just do to this person?
Yeah, I had to tell the audio narrator how to pronounce those words, and I was like, well, they're kind of inspired by Proto-Germanic and a little bit of Proto-Indo-European, so Make sure you just say it with feeling, okay?
Gusto and just go.
Just go for it. Yeah.
Because we were talking beforehand, besides me butchering your name and all the characters' names in this book, other than like, I was also laughing really hard because there's a character named Irmgard, not Ermagard, because there's nothing in between there. It's just Irmgard. And I keep picturing that meme of the girl who's like Ermagard every time I see it. Like, I have to stop laughing at this name. But then there are other names like Ursula and stuff that I think that I could, if I were audio narrating, I probably wouldn't screw up, but I would be butchering her poor first name every single time. Like, Helevies, and then I'm singing Edelweiss, and now I'm doing the opening for Man in the High Castle and just going off on tangents that people are like, no, this was not in your book. Stick to the book. I can't help it. I have never once stayed on track for really anything, but the book does, and that's kind of important because I've read things they almost feel like episodic, and that they're little collections of stories that happen day in a life. And this really isn't. Pretty much from the get-go, we have a little bit of her earlier childhood and a little bit of time jump, but once we get to her kind of mid-teen years, we are on track and moving along pretty quickly. So we grow with her and we see what led her to different stages in her life and how we get there. And every stage feels like a natural progression, which I really enjoy because I feel like there are a lot of times where it's like, hey, and now we just jump the shark, or what's a fantasy version of jumping the shark? I don't know.
Jump the dragon.
I like that. Jump the dragon. There are no dragons, spoiler alert, because I feel like the kind of fantasy, and I wanted to talk to you about genre, because one of the things I love, and I realize a lot of people are like, yes, I love fantasy, but we're not all talking about the same thing. We're not all talking about epic high fantasy where everything is instantly solved with an overpowered protagonist who's just like, look at me, I just rained down power and solved all the problems, and it's like a deus ex machina, but a dragon ex machina, I guess is what it is, or whatever Latin is for dragon. I don't know. I don't speak Latin. Mary kind of does. But I love that nothing like that happens. And that doesn't mean there aren't magical pieces in here, but it's like, it's limited and there's a cost or there's a drain on the person. And it's never just like, oh, look at me, wave my magic wand and oh, everything's all solved, because it does have more of that. It goes back to the herbs and the herbalism where it's, yes, there's a plant that does this, but it can do this too. And oh, here's this tincture that can help with this, but okay, here's the drawback, that it feels so much more organic and natural. And then it kind of extends beyond, oh, but can the plant really do that? And people are like, well, plants couldn't really, but people smoke certain things that really do make them do some stuff. So if you don't think plants can be magical, I am in no way endorsing smoking anything right now, just in case people are wondering about that. But there's some magic herbs and mushrooms and things out there that make people see some pretty exciting stuff, or so I've heard and read about, and never have dabbled myself. Never, not even once. But I do like that it feels so grounded. And so sometimes in fantasy, it is that overpowered thing. And then I keep calling this historical fantasy, and I don't know if that's a term that you're like, yes, no, I don't know. Because I've also read historical fantasy where it's like they're making up histories and then putting it in with other countries. Whereas you're like, no, this is Germany. This is who the king is right now. This is his feud with the Pope over who knows who gets more power. I don't really know. And it really feels grounded because of that. But it almost is like, well, it's fantasy in a historical setting versus a historical fantasy. And now everybody's like, okay, Allison, you're splitting corpse braids here.
No, I mean, this is something that I'm really kind of passionate about. Like, I think of the book as a secret history, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So it's like a secret
found manuscript. Like, this is really what happened.
Yeah. So the idea is this scholar finds this manuscript that ends up being the story of the peasant woman who would become the witch from Rapunzel. Like, who eventually would get known that way, yes. But at the beginning, she's just this peasant girl, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm a huge fan of, I know people talk about like slow burn romance, but I'm a huge fan of slow burn magic systems. And I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else other than me, but like I'm not like,
they're not all the same by any means. And I have a friend who, she's a total plotter, I'm a pantser, and she's like figuring out her magic systems and all that stuff. So there has to be a lot of thought. It's not just wave the wand and say Expelliarmus or whatever nonsense, and things just instantly happen, because there's no real weight to that kind of stuff. It's just snap your fingers or bewitched. Do, 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 do. None of that. None of
Yeah.
that. Sorry, Samantha. No.
No, yeah. So I really enjoy magic system that comes on really slowly. So you start in an era, like in the prologue, when the scholar finds the manuscript, she gets tingles, and there's like, oh, what is it? It's something more than ordinary manuscript. So there's that in the beginning, but then like I wanted the magic system to kind of like creep up on you, right?
Yeah.
And then I wanted to write a magic system that was based in the beliefs of the people of the period. And that's why I wanted to read the herbalism in Hildegard. That's why I read Physica. That's why I was looking at the folklore and the epic poetry that we do have recorded from this period. And so, like the cloak of invisibility that features in the book, like that's from an epic poem that came out about 40 years or 50 years after
Harry Potter.
Huh?
Oh,
no,
sorry.
It's not from Harry Potter.
No, but that's funny, because so one of the things that I find as a parent, and I don't know if you experience this too, is that sometimes when kids first encounter something, they assume that's what originated it. They don't get that whatever it is drawing on all this other stuff. So I'm sure there are people who will read this who are like, she copied from Harry Potter. Guys, Harry Potter didn't make it up. I'm sure most of you know that. Anybody watching this, I'm sure you guys are well enough read that Harry Potter didn't make up pretty much anything. But the ideas are like, okay, these are all grounded in these other histories, and then you use them accordingly. But I love that everything had the slow burn, and that they have costs to them. And it's not just like, okay, well, we're just going to wear it for the rest of the show. Okay, we're just going to wear it here. I'll put my cloak on, come in here, and then I'll hide. And then no one will see anything I do. But it's like, no, there's a cost to it, and not just me looking ridiculous. Because
yeah. I don't think that's a spoiler. I think you can say that when you put on the cloak of invisibility, it can suck you into the shadow world. Like it's a problem.
And that for some people, that's a bigger thing if you're already closer to the shadow world, and somebody who's already dealing with things, who already is more attuned to it than someone else, that it's not just, oh, everybody reacts to these things the same. And there's things where how you treat the particular item or the herb or fruit or seed or whatever, that impacts what happens too, which makes sense. Like we don't eat certain things raw without treating them. My kid, for the longest time, I got an eggplant to put on the grill, and then I forgot and ended up putting it in the oven. He kept wanting to take a bite of an eggplant. I'm like, kid, you can't just eat a bite of eggplant. You have to cut it. And usually you either put salt on it or olive oil to drain out the bitterness. So if we do that now, even in our cooking, but the idea that, oh, it would really make a big difference, other than him biting an eggplant going, oh, I don't like this. Nobody eats eggplant raw, guys. It's gross. but that the same thing would apply to a magic system or to a healing thing, and that line between healing and magic being razor thin, honestly.
Yeah.
That you really address that there. And I love how you did that. And that I love that idea of slow burn magic. I'm gonna put that one in my pocket. I don't have any pockets. I'm pretending, like sticking my hand in my pants. Don't do that. But I like that you had that, because it didn't ever feel overpowered, and it didn't ever take over the narrative to the point where it's like, okay, well, we can see there's an easy way out for all of this. Yay. Nobody wants that. I'm sure there's people who enjoy that, but that's not me.
Yeah. I mean, and for those of you who like magic and who are really big fans, like the magic that's there feels like folktale or fairy tale magic, and it does become stronger as the narrative progresses. And, part of the thing that my editor helped me with was like having this big climactic scene at the end, that brings the magical properties of everything that Hellevise has at her disposal to bear on one of the antagonists.
Well, and I love that you say that too, simply because so there are times when, and I won't say when, because I've talked to different authors, and some of them have this known, and some of them are like, let's not talk about this, that books get changed in the editing process. And there are books that I've read that are like, yeah, this wasn't even supposed to be fantasy. It was supposed to be historical, but because fantasy is selling more right now, we're going to shove in some fantasy. And then the result is sometimes it ends up feeling kind of shoehorned or like just laced on top like a sprinkle, instead of baked into the pie of the book. Let's pretend the book's a pie. And yours, absolutely, like you said, it's not there right at the very beginning, like first thing right out the gate in an overpowering way, but it's sprinkled in at the beginning and then grows as it weaves through. And it's done in such a way that it's in service to the narrative, not overpowering the narrative, and also not feeling like, oh, I could pull the magic out and the book would be the same. Because there are some books where you probably could, where you could just remove that top layer and it's just a history and the magic doesn't really become part of it. And I've read historical fantasy where it's like, it's fantasy because it's really just fiction of a place that doesn't exist, but there's not a whole lot in the way of actual magic. And people who are looking for that magic leave going, well, but where was the magic? Where was that extra? Where was that thing that couldn't happen in real life, or at least we don't think could happen? And yours had that. So I love that. So I need to go find, how do you buy your chapbook? Like this, I know you can buy everywhere because it even says available July 22 everywhere. But if I wanted to go find your chapbook, where would I do that? Or do I have to like bribe you?
No, you could go to my website, and it's marymcmyne.com, and
It's right there. People, if they see
yeah. I didn't see that. Yeah. Okay. So you go there, and then there's a tab that says Wolfskin.
Okay, cool. So they can find that one too.
Yeah.
I love that, and I love the idea of being able to like read it in small increments. I love small dose fiction as like breaking up between other things or something to read as like a nightly ritual. Might be too scary for my 11-year-old, but I don't know. She likes dark stuff. It's good. But you were saying you're working on something else now. Is this something we can talk about? Can we give us a little for what you're working on now and what stage you're in?
Yeah, I because I'm under contract for it, I've written an entire outline, but I'm pretty sure that as I go, I'm just gonna like stomp all over it, because that's what my imagination does, and I'm trying to like come to terms with that the first draft is going to do that, and then I'm gonna
everybody's process is different, and I love it because it's so common where I hear it's like, well, I'm a pantser, but my editor made me. It's like, yeah, I've had an editor make me do an outline, and I did it after I wrote the book because
yeah.
I've heard other people say, oh, reverse outline, but yours can be a great guide for when you start, and then you can just go where you feel like going.
Yeah. No, my editor didn't make me do it. I did it because I was scared.
Oh, the fear of the editor, or the fear of like having a deadline in a contract that says you need to deliver the book by this time, and especially if you're doing the other one like at night over smaller times. Like I don't know when the line between the Wolfskin and this began. Like, how long did it take for you to write this before you started, say, querying it?
I started. The thing is that I wrote it at night, like when I had time, while being a professor and while raising a child. So
how you had time to do that is that's mostly and say there's the magic there that you did that because you're working as a professor, which means you probably had to grade people's papers and do all that, and then you still had time to write on top of that. That's crazy magic right there.
Thank you. It helps that it was an escape for me. It was something that I really enjoyed. This was really like a passion project for me. But I started it in about, I would say 2012, but I was writing Wolfskin concurrently. Like when I didn't have time to work on the novel, I would like dive into a poem and work on that, and because poems for me can be
kind of working. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I can dive in and out of poetry more quickly than I can dive in and out of fiction. Like I usually have to reread the beginning of what I'm working on before I go in and write what comes next. But
otherwise it won't feel coherent. Because I don't know people who could just like pick up and then just start typing. Like, no, I have to go back and get my brain back in what I was working on to get the voice and all of that back to where it was. Otherwise, it would feel really disjointed and like this weird patchwork versus a novel. But with the chapbook, I can see you being like, okay, I'm going to do this particular one and then come back out. Because I'm assuming that the poems weren't nearly as long as a chapter.
No. They're little bitty lyrics and prose poems. So they're not. It's a short book. I think it's like 24 pages or 25 pages, and there's only like 20 poems, I think. 19 maybe. The cover is really cool too. It looks like
Do you have one? Because I think I can see Wicked behind you, and that's not yours, but this would be like one that I would comp yours to. because you have Gregory Maguire like quoting on your book. So I don't know who you bribed there or enchanted. Ensorcelled. You use the word ensorcelled in your book, and I'm like, ensorcelled. I love that word, by the way. To get Gregory Maguire, who's kind of like the godfather of the fairy tale retelling, to blurb on your book. So I'm just going like, Mary knows people.
No, we wrote him out of the blue.
I love it. And I says he really thought what you did was amazing, because I don't think he probably has time to just blurb everybody's fairy retellings, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, when he wrote back with the blurb, I was about 9 months pregnant, and maybe 8.5 months. I literally started screaming and jumping up and down, and my family was like, "Stop it! What are you gonna
shake the baby?
What are you gonna do?" I had already stopped jogging because it was like too much on my body, and anyway, yes, I was very surprised that he actually did a blurb, and I'm very lucky and grateful. But
well, hey, authors out there, shoot for the stars, because Gregory Maguire might write back to you, and you'll jump up and down while 8.5.
But this is wolfskin.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I love how it looks like it's like olden leather with the gold and
it's just a paper chapbook. But I'm really fond of like fictional old things, as you can imagine from my imagination for this book too.
So the one that you're working on now, you actually have an outline that you may or may not throw out the window when you're like, nah, we're not doing that. But you're under contract to write another book. Is it in the same vein as the Book of Gothel? I'm assuming it's kind of similar. Can you tell us what some inspirations are?
Yeah. So, I'm a big fan of retellings and reimaginings, and like stories that engage critically. I don't like that word because it sounds like I'm doing literary criticism, and I'm not at all. No, but like sometimes I read things and I can cuss, right? They piss me off. And I get angry.
Is barely cussing too. It's like that's like when my kids say, "You said stupid." I'm like, "Yeah, I did. That's a bad word." Okay, guys, we're a little extreme with calling things stupid as being a bad word, but for kids, that's cussing.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes I read things and they piss me off, and I want to be like, well, what about this character? Or what about her? And what about how they would have felt? Why is this character's motivation completely going unexplored? And why are we focusing over here when we should be focusing over here? And I felt like that about a lot of things since I was a kid. So one of the things that I proposed for when I got the book deal for Gothel, I got a 2-book deal. And one of the things that I proposed, the one they wanted, was the story of Shakespeare's Dark Lady from her own perspective. And it has to be magic infused. So it's gonna go into like Elizabethan concepts of magic, and the magic system will come from what people believed at that time, and it'll go into. So
you've got to do more research, because you can't even recycle Gothel.
Like, no,
time period.
Yeah, and that it's going to go into the witch trials in that period. And the reason that I wanted to do it, it's something that I've always wanted to do. But the reason that I wanted to do it is that when you read Shakespeare's sonnets, I know that a lot of times the way that they're taught is that, oh, he's not really being that mean to her. He's just, it's a different, the words mean something a little differently back then. But if you, and that's the way they were taught to me when I was in college. I took Shakespeare classes, and then I had
like to Shakespeare apologists. You're like, oh, he didn't really mean that.
Well, and so some of that is true. Like, I think there's a line that says, "Then in the breath that from my mistress reeks." And back then the word reek didn't mean the same thing that it meant now. It means it wafts from her. So it's not an insult just to use that verb.
Didn't mean she was eating all the garlic.
Yeah, it's not that kind of insult. But the problem is when you read it all the way through, when you read like from the beginning to the end of the sonnets, which is like the first thing that I did. I read it several times, and I read like what different people had to say about it. When you read them all the way through, they're like, some of them are kind of love poems. Okay, some of them are love poems, but a lot of them are kind of hate poems. And there's some pretty like misogynistic elements that pop up in the poems. And so I'm just really interested in telling coming up with like, what might she really have have been like. You know, why was she called the Dark Lady? Who was she? And there's a lot of scholarly theories about it, but I'm gonna go with like a magic infused version because that's what fascinates me. And I'm gonna try to do it the same way I did in Gothel, where it kind of walks the line between realism and magic, and it'll be more of a slow burn at the beginning, because that's the kind of stuff I love to read. You know, like slowly discovering that things aren't what they seem.
I'm the same way, and that's how I enjoy writing stuff as well, rather than like, hey, all of a sudden fantasy. I like kind of creeping up to it and like, oh, by the way, the world isn't what you thought, because I think to me that's more interesting than just, yeah, by the way, we're on a different planet and everything's different, and okay, here we go. Because I'm never going to just wake up on another planet, but I could wake up on this one and find I'm not. That to me is more, at least it includes me as a reader and as a writer to go, oh, what if when I open this door, it isn't where I think it's going to lead? And by door, I mean the book, and going deeper into the narrative. So are you going to be writing any sonnets for this? Do you get to write counter sonnets?
No, I don't think I'm going to do that. I thought about it. But you know,
you could do it.
Yeah. I mean, I might write one or two. I'm having fun with like imagining, well, when, like, what is the narrative about, you know, Shakespeare and his young man and the Dark Lady, and like, how do they know each other, and who was involved with who at what time, and who is referencing what. Like, I'm having fun with like the very, very tangled love triangle.
Will you address the question that's been burning on everyone's lips? Is Shakespeare one person or 17 different people?
Yeah, he's one person.
In my version, he's one. It makes it easier to address if it's just one guy and not like, so Shakespeare over here is mad at the Shakespeare over there, and it's just a feud.
Yeah. When another like controversy that shouldn't be a controversy that I'm interested in is, you know, people always wondered, was Shakespeare bisexual? And the sonnets really delve into that. And I'm bisexual, so I'm definitely interested in exploring that. Yeah, so that's another thing that really draws me to this particular story, is just like, it's kind of like this secret history. It's something that people didn't talk about at the time, but people are people.
We're barely talking about it now.
Right.
So let's work on talking about these things.
Yeah.
So I read them through fiction, so I like it.
Yeah. So
well, I'm excited to read it.
Thank you. I'm excited to finish writing it. I'm about 25,000 words in, up to the first draft, and I just had a baby and we just moved, and so I wrote on it 2 days ago and it felt really good. So that's
amazing. I'm like 50 something into what I'm working on, and I haven't looked at it since about when you had your baby, because I had other things I was finishing, and now my kids are home and mine don't let me breathe during the day. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, I want to go back and at least read it to remember what the heck I was doing. So good luck, because I didn't just move and I didn't just have a baby, and I can't imagine you trying to do all that while having all those things. Like, have you figured out how to like nurse and type, or get the goat horn of milk? We don't have goat horn.
That's from the
for you.
That's the March. Yes, exactly what I was just going to say.
The baby thing.
No, I have actually figured out how to write with the child on my lap. So that was a breakthrough. So I've written for about 5 hours this week. So that's really good. I'm super excited. I don't feel very good mentally when I don't get a chance to write. You know, I feel like I worship at the church of writing, and I was raised Catholic, so I have like guilt issues about when I don't write.
No, and I get it. And I feel like part of it is our culture says, well, an author, a real writer writes every day, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's usually people who have a very predictable life who can do that, and maybe don't have other obligations or demands, or have someone else who will take those over. But I'm sorry, usually when you have a baby, you're the only one who can do that. And I don't even have babies anymore, and mine are still like, mommy, and I'm the only one who can take over when they're like that. So I get that. So I'm excited to read where it goes, even if you don't write any dark sonnets that are in response. I'll write one. I can't write sonnets. We will not do that. But I'm excited to read it. I'll be cheering you on from California, and hoping that as you're settled in with baby and new place, that the book will also come and you won't feel guilt from not getting it done because you're going to knock it out of the park.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to read things right now that will inspire me because I have a lot more time to read than I do to write.
What are you reading? What are you reading right now?
I'm rereading Zell by Donna Jo Napoli. It's a Rapunzel retelling. I had to put together a book club kit, and so I wanted to put that on it, and then I was like, I'm gonna reread that. That was really good.
All right, do that. Let's see what it was.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to read like different books that portray witchiness in a variety of ways. And I'm trying to, like, I read a bunch of Elizabethan histories about magic, and I'm trying to like wrap my brain around how the magic will work in the book. Like, what exactly can she do? Like, will it delve into astrology, or will it, like, there was this big trend of people summoning angels and demons. I've read a lot about John Dee, and he's another like famous astrologer and magic practitioner from that period. So I'm trying to I'm reading histories about that, and then I'm also reading like fiction that works magic in, and trying to think about how my magic will work for her, and also like how does it go with the sonnets, and how does it go with how magic is presented in the Shakespeare plays that get into it. So
you got a lot to work in there.
I did. I set up such a
problem. Bless your path.
Thank you.
Person that came to mind, Fairy Queen. There you go. But Mary, we are out of time because we're almost at it. Mary asked me how long is this going to take. I'm like, well, yeah, I try to keep it under an hour. And so if I don't sign off now, we will not be under an hour. So
all right.
Thank you so much for joining us. I loved your book. I'm going to show it one more time because I like showing it off there. But my ring light is shining on it. I'm trying to not have it shine on there. But guys, this will be out next week? It's coming up pretty soon. I want to say it's
July 26th. So it's exactly 2 weeks from today.
Okay. 2 weeks. Be on the lookout for the Book of Gothel by Mary McMyne. Thank you, Mary, so much for joining us. And we will see you again, hopefully next month. I might take August off because I had to this month. But join us tomorrow on Vox Feminist, where we will have Madeline Martin joining us with The Librarian Spy. So more historical. I don't think any magic. I haven't gotten that far in the book yet, so there could be magic librarians. I don't think so, though. She doesn't usually do magic. But thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, everybody. Allison.
Bye. Thanks, Mary. Bye.